First off, excuse my writing style for this story. I don't want it to come off as fictional, but I feel like I'm not really great at telling stories. So, allow me to tell it in this style, that it will hopefully be a little more engaging. I stand by my story, just so you know. Anyway, here you go. Oh, and before I forget, this was back in May of 2018. It all happened in the Republic of Congo. I had just graduated with a master's degree from Brazzaville, Congo. My friends and I had worked really hard for our success. We were all ready to celebrate and head out of town for a party, as this type of success was a lot of hard work and an honor. I didn't drink, but my friends enjoyed it a lot, including my boyfriend. The party was on a Saturday. It had been eagerly planned and very long awaited. That previous night, I had pleaded with my father to lend me his old school minibus to drive everybody there. There were a total of 6 of us, 3 males and 3 females. Perfect couples was the name of our roommates gave us. Everything was packed, and we started to head off. Just to be safe, I decided to bring my gun. The journey was long, and almost everybody had fallen asleep, except Kimaku, a big drinker and joker. He was talking, keeping me awake in the front seat, but eventually, I felt tired and dizzy after having driven for more than 7 hours straight. I had asked him if he could drive. I mean, of course he could, but I was worried about him being intoxicated. He, of course, assured me that he could drive, and asked me, what kind of question is that? He also asked if I'd hurt his feelings. I didn't want to talk back to him and make too much noise since there were others already asleep. Out of exhaustion and drowsiness, I handed over the steering wheel to him. I didn't know it at the time that I was making a big mistake. After sleeping for only a few hours, my boyfriend woke me up, and I had no idea where we were. The place was dark, quiet, surrounded by brush. Nobody knew how to get there, even Kimaku himself. The worst part of it, everybody was pretty intoxicated. I was alone. I turned on the data on my phone and geo-tracked our location. Congo Forest. Yes, Congo Forest was what the tracker showed. This area is really dangerous, and we really should not have been there. I've heard scientists even claim it to be inhabited by people who eat others, aka cannibals, although there's many who never believed that claim. I try to forget about hearing these claims where we were, but thoughts about dangerous animals in the forest didn't sit well with me. I don't think anybody ever lived in the forest, but my phone's GPS detected a house not far from our location, so I decided to get in the car and drive towards the house. I wasn't sure whether it was safe, but for the moment, I believed it was safer than being in the dark and thick brush. Now, it was nearly 10:30 p.m. when I walked my drunken friends into the house. Again, I was all alone, uncovered, as they say. I walked towards the entrance door. From the outside, the house seemed totally fine, but monstrously massive. At least until I noticed that I had not seen everything properly in the dark. As my eyes would adjust, I could see there was no ceiling. The house was dusty, cobwebs everywhere. Furniture remains were scattered on the floor, and a lot of questions ran through my head, but all were left unanswered, as I knew we needed to get to sleep. I was almost falling asleep when I heard something pass near the house. I assumed it was nothing. I mean, maybe I just hallucinated it. So I had stayed still and listened, hoping nothing would happen. And nothing did happen for about 15 minutes. But then I hear the noises again. This time it was real. I heard it very clearly. A loud roar outside, almost like a scream, not far from the door. I remember how I felt. It was a feeling of confusion. I had no control of my thoughts of fears. At first, I thought it could be monkeys living in the forest, or other animals searching for food. But the myths running my mind about existing cannibals would not let me rest. I was not really scared until I heard loud and consistent banging sound on the outside walls of the house. It was getting louder and louder now. Every time I heard something, my heartbeat would beat louder and louder in my chest. I was still sitting and had not made a single move, being entirely still. Kept looking around, making sure nothing was coming in. Yeah, I had the gun with me, but what was I shooting at? I had my phone with me too, but I could not even think to use it. Anyway, we were really far from help. Who could even rescue us? Finally, the noise ceased. I thought to myself, maybe the creature left, but I wasn't totally convinced of that. I was steadily looking to the wall where the banging had come from last. I decided to go ahead and reach for my phone, only to see the creature staring in at me. I couldn't see it clearly in the dim light from the moon, but it was standing right next to the glass door. It could see me. It was almost the same size as the door. Actually, it was taller, but standing back away from it. At first, I thought it was a human because of its eyes that seemed to be thinking and calculating. But then I noticed it had a hairy body. That made no sense at all. I thought it would attack immediately if I tried to reach or help or wake up my friends, so I never moved an inch. Taking a closer look at it made me notice that it had a very short snout. This wasn't a normal creature. This was something extraordinary. The more it stood looking at me without doing anything, the more courage I gained. This time round, I moved. I stood still with my gun on my hand, ready for anything. The creature moved too. This time, I got a good look at its eyes, as the moonlight caught them and gave them this yellow ambery glow. All I could wonder was if it was ready to attack. My friends were all still passed out and had no idea what was maybe about to happen. And just then, this thing slowly moved backward, and then in a flash, seemed to vanish. For my friends, it was a normal night as they never woke up. But for me, it was a long night. I just lay there thinking about what I had just seen. I could not sleep, and continued to listen for the creature to return. The next morning, I drove my friends back home safely. I never spoke to anyone about what I'd seen. I knew they would never believe me. Until now. So I can't give you the best descriptions of what it is that I saw, but it did kind of look like a dog, standing upright on two legs. Could this be, even though I'm in Africa, could this be what you are seeing out there in the United States? I seriously doubt that it would be a werewolf, but what if these creatures are all over the world? I'll never shake that feeling that it gave me. I was working at a water treatment facility the year after I had graduated high school. Growing up in a small town in Georgia, there really weren't a lot of options if I did not want to go away to college or have a really long commute to a job that wouldn't pay you much better. I knew it was only going to be a temporary thing until I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. The job itself was pretty easy, although it was mind-numbingly boring at times. I basically just sat at a desk with 6 monitors in front of me, looking for anything unusual. Anything or anyone that could disrupt or contaminate the water reservoir. I almost always worked the night shift, which was okay with me because I was a night owl anyway, and I really enjoyed the peace and quiet of being there at night with fewer people. It was a cool night in December, right around midnight, December of 2014, as a matter of fact, which was about an hour after I started my shift. The only other person I had seen at work that night was a guy who I'll call Joe. He was a nice older guy who worked on the inspection and maintenance of the equipment. We had talked a little bit about the upcoming party, which would be really just a lot of us guys drinking way too much and being more annoying than they usually were at work. So Joe was trying to convince me to come to the party. As one of only 4 or 5 women who work there, I had already decided I was not going to this party. I was going to be leaving the job anyway after Christmas, and probably start classes at a community college. I was going to be leaving that job anyway after Christmas to start classes at community college. I was ready to get out of this town, and that was the first step. So, I was browsing through a catalog of college courses, looking at the monitors periodically. There was nothing to see, at least unusual, except the occasional animal that would squeeze its way through the fence. This night, though, was different. At first, I thought I saw unusual amounts of movement, but the image looked kind of fuzzy. The cameras we used weren't the highest quality, and sometimes images faded in and out. Thanks management for being stingy about upkeep. I assumed it was probably Joe, doing a walking inspection. But then, when it got closer to the camera, I could see the image more clearly, and I lost it. It looked exactly like this. A dog head. But it was not a dog. Whatever it was way too big to be a dog, and it was standing like a person, upright on 2 legs, with long arms dangling at its sides. It was big and bulky too, like a bodybuilder, or like the body of a gorilla. That's actually probably the best description I could think. A dog head on a big gorilla-like body. So I ran to the door, and just as I began to open it, Joe comes running toward me. His face is white, and he looked terrified. He nearly knocks me over. As soon as we got inside, he locks the door. I asked him what was out there, but he didn't say anything. Just silence. He stared out the window at the top of the door. The creature had walked slowly past us, and that's when I realized just how big this animal was. Easily 8 or 9 feet. Joe and I didn't say anything. We just stared at whatever this unknown thing was. An animal, a creature, a failed science experiment, something. But just then, it turned and ran, easily scaling the 10-foot barbed wire fence without nothing. I remember thinking I must be dreaming, and trying to pinch myself to wake up. But it wasn't a dream. Joe and I were finally able to talk a few moments later. We convinced ourselves that we must have seen a werewolf, a real living one. Not that that explanation made any sense or made us feel any better, but we immediately began searching the internet to see if we can find anything better to explain what we had seen. We found some pictures and descriptions that seemed to match what we had seen. Of course, there's no proof of what happened. We did not tell anyone else at first, because we knew nobody would believe us without proof. Him and I were both extremely apprehensive about sharing this encounter. I mean, if you tell anybody that you'd seen a living werewolf, you'd be laughed at. But we thought there'd be a video recording of it, asked the supervisor the next day. But as it turns out, because our management is so stingy, the cameras recorded over the tape every 12 hours, so we never got the proof. I left the job the next week, moved out of town a couple of years later. From what I heard, Joe still worked there until retiring last year. It turns out we have a few mutual connections outside of work. Him and I have actually kept in touch, even if nobody else believes us. We know what we saw that night. I firmly believe that even though it might not have been a werewolf, it was definitely a Dogman.